I decided to take another stab at 19th century, early 19th century stays. I decided this time to do half stays. They kind of look like a modern day bralette, but they function in the same way that the wrap stays would. That is, they give the lifting and the Grecian Roman shape without having to be the wrap corset. So rather than focus on adjusting and readjusting monkeys, typewriters, Shakespeare, that sort of thing, with the wrap stays, I decided I'm just gonna wing it. And it worked. You can find patterns for the half stays just as you can find patterns for the wrap stays online. But seeing as I didn't seem to be particularly gifted at transferring patterns online to real life, I decided to use what I had. My dress patterns. The first thing I did was take out the 3 main pieces of the dress pattern that form the bodice. I then traced these onto craft paper and made adjustments. For example, this is the front of the bodice. You would place this line on the fold, open it up, voila. Now with the half stays, I wanted it to actually lace up the front. I was just going to place this so I would have 2 sides not connected, so not on the fold. What I also wanted to do was lower the neckline and straighten this bottom bit. Now I didn't straighten this bottom bit until later on, but I'll show you that in a minute. So I ended up with a shape like this. You can see I have lowered the neckline here, I've straightened this a bit, and I've straightened the bottom somewhat. I did something similar with the back piece. This is upside down just so you can see these two next to each other. Here is the back piece I ended up with. Now, since I wanted this piece to be one whole piece, I made sure to cut this one on the fold. I lowered the back dramatically, as you can see, and that's because of how it ended up falling when I made the mock-up, which I will show you in a minute. Lastly, I took this piece, which forms the sides of the bodice. The only thing I changed about this was adding 2 centimeters onto the bottom. I didn't change anything else, so I didn't bother to make a whole new pattern for it since it was just, again, 2 centimeters. The last thing I made a pattern for, and I didn't make this until after, was for the gusset that would go in the bodice. It's 4 centimeters across, 8 centimeters down, and I just traced from 1 centimeter down here up and up. This is going to be different for everyone's bust. I kind of just guessed mine, and it worked. I don't really suggest that, but hey ho, it worked. So let's look at the mock-up. Right, so I made this mock-up out of leftover fabric from my dress. You can tell because it's that really, really dull color. When I made this mock-up, that's where I discovered that I needed to add the 2 centimeters onto this, and also that I needed to lower the back, because even though I had lowered it some, I hadn't lowered it enough. So I measured how much more I wanted to take off, and I transferred that onto the pattern. With the mock-up for the front, I made sure that it fell just where I wanted to, so just below the chemise line, because the chemise line will be lower than the dress line. And I also cut the slits where I imagined I'd be fitting in gussets and measured how far apart they needed to be. I guess that kind of explains how big my gussets were in the end, but then I ended up adding 2 gussets, so ta-da! One thing I did that didn't make it onto the paper pattern was I extended this about another centimeter or 2 and brought it up this way. That gave me a bit more area and allowed me to add a second gusset onto the finished piece. I did that because once I tried on the final piece, I realized I really did need the second gusset because it looked kind of odd. It still pulled me in right, but it needed it. I can't really explain why, it just needed it. So there is a second gusset on the finished one. As you can see in the middle here, I folded over 1 inch twice, so 2 inches of fabric. This is where I plan to put my grommets and my lacing. Another thing I didn't plan out on the mock-up was where I was going to put the boning, and the reason I didn't put it on the mock-up was because I kind of wanted to go by feel. Since stays are unique really to each person in terms of lift, I wanted to see where exactly the supports would need to go for myself. Also, I looked at examples online and pretty much just ended up following the most commonly placed areas. So let's go look at the finished pair on the table first. Okay, so here are my finished short stays. You can see they're made out of the same calico fabric that I plan to make the wrap stays out of. I somehow managed to have enough fabric even though I was cutting it quite close. Here are the 2 gussets on each side. I might tweak the coloring of this clip because I realized that white on white on white on cream isn't the best. Next to the 2 gussets are 2 pieces of boning on either side. So 2 pieces frame the grommets and 2 pieces also go in a kind of slight diagonal next to them. And it's repeated, of course, on this side as well. We look at the side. So as you can see under the arm, we have 2 more pieces of boning. Again, the boning I used is just zip ties, cut zip ties. Right, so let's move on to the back. Now, the back is where I got the most creative. Now, I don't know if you could see on the mannequin, but the fabric on the back was quite loose. And I think that's because in terms of the dress itself, if you remember it, it was quite loose on me to begin with. So I needed to figure out a way to tighten everything, if that makes sense. So what I did was I added 2 long darts. I stitched it on both sides for strength and to keep them held down, but they're essentially darts. They end up pulling the back at a slight angle, which makes wrapping it just a little bit tighter. I also had to remember that since the front was going to be folded in, I was going to lose some real estate up front. I knew the lacing was going to be there, but I had to kind of remember that when I was making these darts. These are just normal seams from the back, but I double stitched them. So they're stitched on one side and stitched on the other. Again, just to add extra strength. So all together you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces of boning on each side and some added darts in the back. The grommets I learned how to do with a little grommet kit. To be more historically accurate though, you might actually just sew them as eyelets. But by this point, I was kind of tired and I didn't feel like hand sewing little eyelets to get this done, so grommets it was. But I'm actually really proud of this because it actually turned out really well for being really makeshift. So what I'll do now is I will put it on over a chemise and show you what it does. Okay, so this is the finished product. I'll do a little turn. Ta-da! So as you can see, it falls lower than the chemise as planned. It laces up quite nicely, and it is nice and fitted around the sides. It's a little loose, but I've tried it on with the dress, but the dress is definitely too loose, and I will need to take that into consideration for the next dress I make. I have to say, I think I'm more proud of these stays than I am that dress. And I don't know if it's because I had to think on my toes, or if it's just because it actually fits right. Maybe it's both. It's probably both. It's probably both. Turning around, you can see that the darts in the back have their desired effect of sort of tightening again. Again, it is, like I said, a little loose, but that's fine. In terms of comfort, it's really comfortable. I could probably wear this for a while. The chemise I'm using is actually the chemise that I had under the dress before, not the newer chemise I made. But let's talk about chemises. Now that we have an actual pair of stays to work with, I thought rather than jump into making another dress, let's make the rest of the undergarments. So that means a proper chemise, not bedsheet chemise. And that also means a petticoat and a chemisette. So for the next video, my hopeful plan is to make a new chemise, a petticoat, and a chemisette. That may seem like a big order, but when it comes to those items, they're made of really simple shapes. It's not going to be like Stays where everything has to be just so. And I'm going to be using an amazing resource that I was able to get last week and that I'm so excited to put to use. So because the Regency style really spans the late 18th century into the 19th century, I invested in the American Duchess guidebooks. These are amazing, really well written, very helpful, and will be playing a huge role in the next video if the next video goes as planned. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions about the construction or if you have any criticisms, please leave them in the comments. I would love to hear both because obviously constructive criticism is what I live for. So thanks so much for watching. I hope this was entertaining / informative / helpful / I don't know. But I hope it was something. So anyway, thank you again, and have a great day, evening, week, things. Bye.